Hi, this is John Leonard. I'm a lawyer at Fairfield and Woods in Denver. We're a law firm. I work with about 50 other lawyers. And this is one of a series of videos we're doing on our corporate law practice, employment law practice, litigation, and other things that we do at Fairfield and Woods. Today, I get to talk to one of my partners, Colin Walker. He's one of our employment lawyers. I work with Colin almost every day on things. So Colin, let's talk about some aspects of employment law. And let's start first with something general. If I bring you a new client, so I have a lot of technology clients. If I bring you a client that's been around for a few days, a few months, or maybe a year or two, what kinds of documents should they have? What are you looking for in terms of types of documents? What's a good suite of documents look like in your mind?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, John. It's great to be here. And I love talking about employment law. And it's particularly important with a new company. A couple things I would recommend. I would recommend having a written employment agreement with your key employees. You don't necessarily need one with every single employee, but the key employees, especially the higher level executive types, a written employment agreement. If you have any independent contractors, then an independent contractor agreement is a really important thing. Intellectual property type documents such as non-disclosure or confidentiality agreements, intellectual property agreements to protect your written materials and that kind of thing. And then an employee handbook is a good thing.
And not to go into a ton of detail here at this time, but how would a company know if it has an independent contractor and not an employee?
Yeah, it gets a little bit complicated, and people make mistakes all the time. But an independent contractor has to be in an independent trade or occupation and has to control how the work is done. Think about a carpenter that you might hire to build a deck on your house. You hire the carpenter, you tell him what kind of deck you want, when you want it done, how big, what kind of materials and stuff, but you don't tell him how to build the deck. He decides to do that, uses his own tools. That is a classic independent contractor situation. So an independent contractor for a more typical business might be like a part-time bookkeeper. You're just hiring to do some of your bookkeeping, or an IT consultant. Doesn't work exclusively for you, but an important part of your workforce. You're going to want an independent contractor agreement with those folks.
Software programmer that works for other companies might be another.
Yes, could be.
Yeah. Let's talk about employment agreements.
Yeah.
I see all sorts of types of employment agreements. Some are like in letter form. Some are formal agreements. Is a signed offer letter just as good as something called an employment agreement? And what would each have in it? Just hitting the high point.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot to talk about here, but basically, I think of there's kind of three areas that you want to address in an employment agreement. One is the terms and conditions of your deal with the employee. How much is he or she going to be paid? What is he or she doing? What kind of benefits, such as vacation and health care, do they have? That's one big part. Another part is protecting the company's assets, and that includes intellectual property. So you want to think about things like confidentiality. You want to think about things like non-compete or non-solicitation agreements if you want one. Now, not every employee can have a non-compete or non-solicitation agreement, but your higher level folks could. Returning property at the end of employment and protecting, make sure the company has rights and intellectual property. And then what happens when the employment agreement ends? What if there's a dispute? What does each side have to do when the employment agreement ends? Those are kind of the three big areas that I think of when I think of an employment agreement.
Do employment agreements have to have a specific term? I mean, do I have to say I'm hiring you for a certain amount of period, or can I hire or fire people even if I have an agreement? How does that work?
Yeah, no, there's no requirement to have a specific term. Sometimes they do. Usually when the employee insists on it, a highly sought after employee might insist on a contract for a year or 2 or 3 years, even more. Usually employment is at will in this country. In other countries, it may be different, but in this country, it's at will. And that means either the employer or the employee can terminate the relationship at any time for any reason without prior notice. And usually when I'm advising employers, I want to keep it that way. And that's something I'll put right in that employment contract. This is an at-will employment relationship, meaning either side can terminate it at any time for any reason or no reason at all. But if you're going to have a term, then you ought to have some language around how does it end? What if we want to end it early? What happens at the end of the term? And there can be a lot of disputes over that sort of thing. So you want to be careful with that.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Let's turn next to an employee handbook. I know we have one at the firm. In fact, we just redid ours because I'm talking to you in February of 2021. There were a fair amount of changes in Colorado law on employment laws, as you well know. Just as a rule of thumb, when is a company big enough to have an employee handbook? When would you start talking to them about that? Is that a day one type of thing, or what? When is it?
Well, John, it's a great question, and a lot of new companies overlook this. I'd rather have it as soon as possible because what happens is if you don't get it done right away, then you tend to forget about it until you actually have a dispute, and then it may be too late. So the sooner the better. It's not hard to put together an employee handbook. I could put a basic employee handbook together in less than an hour, working with the client to tailor it to suit their needs. It's an easy thing to do. And once you've got it done. You may want to revisit it every so often, but you don't have to have an employee handbook, but I certainly recommend them because it really helps to have policies such as sexual harassment policies, such as policies on the healthcare leave that's required now by Colorado law and the law of many other states, because you want the employees to know this, you want your managers to know it, and you want to make sure you're compliant. The other thing, of course, is it helps you manage your employees, so everybody kind of knows the rules, and everybody can comply with them, and nobody can say I didn't know the rules if you've got an employee handbook. Now you got to be careful. Once you have an employee handbook, you need to comply with it. You got to follow your policies, and if you don't, you can get into trouble. But a typical employee handbook is not very long. It's 6 or 8 pages, and it has various policies, some of which we recommend for legal reasons, some of which are just good management practices.
Yeah. Well, let's say you and I start a company. We're the 2 founders. We're probably not going to have an employee handbook then, are we? We'd wait until we hired our first employee.
Yeah, when you've got 2 founders, they may not even be employees at all. They may be partners in some sense. They may be employees, but yeah, I think when John and Colin formed their cigar making business, I think we don't need an employee handbook. But when we start hiring folks to start rolling the cigars, it's probably the time to do it.
All right. Good to know. Well, look, we'll put your contact information on after this, but people can call you and find you through our website. You also have a blog, don't you?
I do. Thanks for mentioning that, John. I've started a blog called C-Level Law, C-Level Law. We'll give you some information on that at the end. And you can also just Google it up. Just Google C-Level Law. It'll come right up, and we talk about these kind of issues and a lot of other issues as well.
Perfect. Colin, thanks for spending a few minutes with me today.
Great to see you, John. Let's talk again soon.